The planet Velnar 7 was the kind of place space travelers only visited if their ships forced them to. For Captain Elias Kane, the sand-blasted, storm-scarred wasteland was precisely that, a mandatory stop courtesy of his barely functional spacecraft, the Wayfarer. As the twin suns of Velnar 7 climbed higher, bathing the endless dunes in a searing golden light, Elias found himself hunched over a disassembled ion drive. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the dusty toolkit at his feet. Every click of his spanner was accompanied by a muttered curse, mostly directed at the ship's outdated engineering manual, which refused to explain why the ion capacitor decided to implode mid-flight. "This is why you don't cheap out on spare parts," he grumbled, tossing a burnt-out coil behind him. It landed with a faint thunk, barely disturbing the sand. "Great deal, my foot. The only thing that salvager sold me was a headache." He leaned back, squinting at the sky where electric blue streaks occasionally darted across the clouds. Electromagnetic storms, unpredictable, violent, and excellent at frying navigation systems. This planet was a death trap. And yet, here he was, smack in the middle of nowhere, miles from any sign of civilization or help. Just as Elias was debating the merits of screaming into the void, he heard a noise. At first, it was faint, like the hum of a far-off engine. He dismissed it as the wind, until it grew louder. It had a rhythm, a cadence, almost like footsteps. He turned, hand instinctively reaching for the plasma pistol at his hip. The figure emerging from the dunes was unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Tall and impossibly graceful, the stranger moved with an ease that defied the harsh terrain. She was alien, unmistakably so. Her skin shimmered like liquid opal, catching the sunlight in rippling hues of green, blue, and violet. Her eyes, large, almond-shaped, and eerily luminous, fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. A cascade of dark, metallic hair framed her face, glinting like woven starlight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Elias had the distinct impression that she was sizing him up, much like a predator, evaluating whether its prey was worth the effort. "Need a hand?" she said at last, her voice smooth and slightly accented. Elias blinked. What? Are you real?" She tilted her head, her expression amused. "Do hallucinations usually ask you if they're real?" "Fair point," he muttered, lowering his weapon. "But you're not exactly what I expected to see out here. Name's Elias Kane, captain of this, well, what used to be a functioning starship." Her gaze shifted to the Wayfarer, and she let out a low whistle. "That's a lot of duct tape for something meant to fly through space." "Hey, it's a classic," Elias shot back defensively. "Or it was before it decided to die on me." The alien woman stepped closer, her movements deliberate, as if testing his reaction. "Call me Thera," she said, crouching beside the disassembled ion drive. "And you're lucky I found you first. This planet's not exactly friendly to outsiders." "Oh, really? I thought the constant threat of death was part of the tourist package." Thera smirked, her opalescent features catching the sunlight. "Cute. Let me guess. You're stranded, low on supplies, and your distress beacon's toast?" Elias rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, that about sums it up. You offering to help, or are you just here to mock my ship?" "Why not both?" Thera teased, reaching into a small satchel slung over her shoulder. She pulled out a device that looked like a cross between a scanner and a toaster. "I can fix your ship, but it won't be free." Elias eyed the gadget warily. "And what exactly do you want in return?" Thera's smile widened, revealing slightly pointed teeth. "Let's just say I have a favor in mind, but don't worry, it's nothing too dangerous. Probably." "Probably?" "Relax, Captain. If I wanted to harm you, I wouldn't waste my time talking first." She pressed a button on the toaster scanner, and a soft hum filled the air. "Now, do you want your ship fixed, or would you prefer to spend the rest of your life arguing with sand dunes?" Elias sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Fine. But if this turns out to be some elaborate con, I'm going to be very annoyed." Thera chuckled. "Noted. Now step aside and let me show you how real tech works. Over the next hour, Elias watched in equal parts awe and frustration as Thera tinkered with the Wayfarer. Her hands moved with a precision he'd never seen, her alien tools making quick work of problems he'd spent hours agonizing over. "Could you at least pretend this is difficult?" he asked, crossing his arms. "Why?" Thera replied, not looking up from her work. "I don't want to ruin the illusion that I'm vastly more competent than you." Elias opened his mouth to retort, then closed it again. She had a point. By the time the suns began to dip below the horizon, painting the desert in fiery hues, Thera stepped back with a satisfied nod. "There, your ship isn't pretty, but it'll fly." Elias stared at her, then at the ship, then back at her. "That's it? No explosions, no last-minute disasters?" Thera's grin turned mischievous. "Don't jinx it, Captain. And remember, you owe me. I'll let you know what I need soon enough." Before Elias could press her for details, Thera began walking away, her silhouette fading into the glowing sands. As the stars began to dot the darkening sky, Elias stood alone beside his patched-up ship, a mix of relief and unease churning in his gut. Whatever Thera's favor turned out to be, one thing was certain. His life had just become a lot more complicated. The morning on Velnar 7 began with the planet's twin suns casting uneven shadows across the dunes, and Elias Kane waking to the sound of an alien woman yelling at him. "Get up, Captain. We've got work to do." Elias groaned, pulling his threadbare blanket over his head. "Thera, it's not even whatever the equivalent of morning is here." Thera stood at the entrance to his ship, arms crossed, an amused smile playing on her lips. "If you want to fly off this rock, you're going to have to hold up your end of the deal." Elias peeked out from under the blanket, one eye squinting at her. "Can't you just tell me what the deal is? Or is suspense part of the contract?" Thera sighed theatrically. "Fine. I need you to come with me to a settlement nearby. Pretend to be my partner for the day." Elias blinked. "Partner like business partner, life partner, or—" Thera's smile turned into a smirk. "Let's call it a mix of the first two and leave it at that. Don't worry, you'll just be arm candy." "Arm candy?" Elias sat up, running a hand through his messy hair. "Lady, I'm a starship captain, not some—" "A starship captain with a broken ship, stranded on a hostile planet," Thera interjected smoothly. "You don't exactly have room to negotiate." Elias muttered something under his breath but hauled himself to his feet. "Fine, but if this ends with me getting thrown into some alien gladiator pit, I'm out." Thera grinned. "Noted. Now hurry up. The locals get cranky if you keep them waiting." The journey to the settlement was, in Elias's words, a comedy of errors. For one, Thera's idea of transportation was a hover sled, a sleek metallic platform with a tendency to wobble unpredictably over the uneven terrain. Elias clung to the edges for dear life as the sled zipped across the dunes, while Thera stood at the helm, her balance impeccable. "Is this thing supposed to feel like it's about to fling me into orbit?" Elias shouted over the wind. Thera glanced back, an infuriatingly calm expression on her face. "Relax, Captain. You'll only fall off if you stop holding on." "That's not as reassuring as you think it is." Halfway through the trip, the sled skidded to a halt, nearly sending Elias tumbling face first into the sand. "What now?" he asked, brushing sand off his jacket. Thera crouched beside the sled, frowning at a small panel that was flashing an ominous red light. "Looks like a grumble beast chewed through the power conduit." "A what now?" Before Thera could answer, a low guttural sound rumbled behind them. Elias turned to see a creature lumbering out from behind a dune. It resembled a cross between a rhinoceros and a sloth, with thick, wrinkled skin and an unfortunate habit of belching clouds of green gas. "That," Thera said, nodding toward the creature, "is a grumble beast." Elias wrinkled his nose. "Why does it smell like someone set a garbage fire inside an airlock?" Because it's marking its territory, Thera said matter-of-factly, and we're standing in it. So unless you want to make friends, I suggest you grab that toolkit and help me fix the sled. The next 10 minutes were a chaotic mix of Elias fumbling with alien tools and Thera trying to shoo the grumble beast away by throwing bits of scrap metal at it. When the sled finally roared back to life, Elias didn't wait for an invitation. He leapt onto it and refused to let go until they reached the settlement. The settlement of Vakor was like stepping into another galaxy. Towering spires of polished metal rose from the sand, glowing softly with bioluminescent patterns. The market square bustled with life, an eclectic mix of alien species bartering goods that ranged from shimmering crystals to jars of wriggling multicolored worms. Elias gawked as they walked through the crowded streets. "This place looks like someone threw a rave inside a scrapyard." Thera chuckled. "Stick close, Captain. You're not exactly blending in here." Elias glanced around, noting the curious stares from the locals. His human appearance seemed to draw more attention than he was comfortable with. One merchant, a squat, frog-like creature with 3 eyes, offered Thera a set of levitating boots in exchange for the strange pink alien. Thera pretended to consider the offer. Tempting, but no thanks. He's more useful than he looks. "Gee, thanks," Elias muttered. They eventually arrived at a small domed building where Thera's business partner was waiting. The partner in question turned out to be a towering reptilian alien with scarred scales and an expression that screamed, "I don't do small talk." "Carrick," Thera said, her tone casual but her posture tense. "You've got something I need." Carrick's eyes narrowed. "And you've brought a human. How quaint." Elias decided to play along, flashing a cocky grin. "Nice to meet you too. Love what you've done with the place." The tension in the room was palpable as Thera and Carrick began to negotiate over an energy module, the key component needed to fix the Wayfarer completely. As the conversation grew more heated, Elias couldn't help but feel like he was standing on the edge of a very steep cliff. Finally, Carrick leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. "I don't trust you, Thera, and I trust your partner even less." Thera smiled, but her eyes were cold. "Then it's a good thing trust isn't part of the deal." Carrick let out a deep, rumbling laugh, but there was no humor in it. "I'll give you the module, but if you cross me, I'll make sure you regret it." As they left the building, module in hand, Elias glanced at Thera. "You know, for a simple trade, that felt a lot like negotiating with a carnivorous plant." Thera shrugged. "Welcome to Velnar 7. Try not to get eaten." Elias groaned. "I have a feeling this is going to get worse before it gets better." Thera's grin returned, sharp and full of mischief. "Oh, Captain, you have no idea." Elias had thought that escaping Carrick's unsettling glare and returning to the relative peace of his ship would mean a reprieve from the growing chaos of the day. Instead, he found himself trailing after Thera as she led him into the labyrinthine heart of Vakor. "Care to tell me why we didn't just hightail it back to the ship?" Elias asked, stepping over a bundle of tentacled creatures that may or may not have been sleeping. Thera didn't slow down. "Because the deal's only halfway done." "Halfway?" Elias stopped dead in his tracks, crossing his arms. "Thera, you said fixing my ship was a simple trade. A favor, you called it. You didn't mention anything about a part 2. Thera finally turned to face him, her opalescent features unreadable in the dim glow of the settlement's lights. "The module is useless without a stabilizer, Captain, and stabilizers are not exactly easy to come by." Elias sighed, rubbing his temples. "Let me guess. The stabilizer's locked behind another favor and the cycle of insanity continues?" Thera smirked. "Exactly. Now stop complaining and keep up. You'll like this next part." The next part, as it turned out, was a cantina nestled in the shadow of Vakor's central spire. The place was alive with music and laughter, the kind of raucous energy that only came from too many drinks and too few inhibitions. Elias hesitated at the entrance. You brought me to a bar? Thera raised an eyebrow. You don't like bars? I like bars just fine. It's what usually happens after the bar that concerns me. Thera grinned. Relax, Captain. This is just a friendly meeting with an old acquaintance. No gladiator pits, I promise. Elias muttered something unintelligible, but followed her inside. The cantina was as chaotic as Elias had expected. A group of feathered aliens argued over a holographic card game at one table, while a three-headed bartender served drinks that glowed ominously. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp tang of alien spices, making Elias's eyes water. At a corner booth, a wiry alien with skin like cracked obsidian waved them over. He had a wide, toothy grin that suggested he found life endlessly amusing, or perhaps that he'd just heard the galaxy's dirtiest joke. Thera, the alien called, his voice a raspy drawl. You're a sight for sore eye clusters. Thera slid into the booth with the ease of someone who'd done this 100 times before. Elias followed reluctantly, sitting at the edge of the seat like he might need to bolt at a moment's notice. Lorik, Thera said smoothly. Still running scams and selling scrap, I see. Lorik laughed, a sound like gravel tumbling down a hill. You wound me. I'm a legitimate businessman these days. Thera snorted. Sure you are. Listen, I need a stabilizer. Lorik's grin widened, his cracked skin catching the light. Ah, I see. And you've brought a human. Let me guess, he's the muscle? Elias opened his mouth to object, but Thera cut him off. He's my partner. Lorik's grin faltered. You're serious? As a collapsing star, Thera said, leaning back and draping an arm over the booth. Now, do you have the stabilizer or not? Lorik studied her for a moment before nodding. I've got one, but it's going to cost you. Thera raised an eyebrow. Cost me what? Lorik's grin returned, sharper this time. There's a game in the back room. High stakes. If you win, the stabilizer's yours. If you lose, well, let's just say you'll owe me. Elias leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Hold on. You want us to gamble for it? What kind of game are we talking about? Lorik's eyes gleamed with mischief. A classic. Zynar's Gambit. Ever played? Elias groaned. Of course it's Zynar's Gambit. Why wouldn't it be? Thera shot him a curious look. You know the game? Let's just say I have a complicated history with it, Elias muttered. And by complicated, I mean I'm terrible at it. Thera smirked. Good thing I'm not. The back room of the cantina was a far cry from the lively chaos outside. It was dark and quiet, the air thick with tension, as players gathered around a holographic table. The game board was a swirling, ever-shifting array of light and shadow, the rules as opaque as the players' expressions. Zynar's Gambit was less about strategy and more about reading your opponent, something Thera seemed unnervingly good at. Elias watched from the sidelines as Thera took her seat across from Lorik. He tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut, which told him this was a terrible idea. The game began with a flurry of moves, each player deploying holographic pieces that pulsed with energy. Thera's focus was unshakable, her moves precise and deliberate. Lorik, for his part, seemed to revel in the drama, his toothy grin never wavering. You're good, Thera, he said, placing a piece that sent ripples across the board. But you've got to tell. Thera didn't blink. So do you. The game dragged on, the stakes growing higher with each move. Elias found himself gripping the edge of his seat, his heart pounding despite his best efforts to stay detached. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Thera made her move. A single decisive placement of her piece sent the holographic board into a cascade of light, signaling her victory. Lorik let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be. You actually beat me. Thera leaned back, a satisfied smile on her lips. I'll take that stabilizer now. Lorik nodded, reaching into a compartment under the table and pulling out a sleek silver device. A deal's a deal, but be careful, Thera. Not everyone you play with is as forgiving as I am. Thera took the stabilizer and stood, motioning for Elias to follow. As they left the cantina, Elias couldn't help but shake his head. You've got a strange way of solving problems, Thera. She grinned. And yet, here we are, one step closer to fixing your ship. Elias sighed, glancing at the stars above. One step closer to leaving this insane planet, and not a moment too soon. Thera's smile faded slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing over her face. We'll see, Captain. We'll see. Elias Kane crouched in the shadow of the Wayfarer, tools scattered around him like forgotten puzzle pieces, as he tried to make sense of the alien stabilizer Thera had won in the cantina. The silvery device gleamed in the midday suns, looking far too pristine for a ship as battered as his. Okay, explain this to me again, Elias said, poking the stabilizer with a screwdriver. How does this thing work? And more importantly, why does it hum like an angry swarm of bees? Thera was leaning against a nearby rock, her arms crossed and an exasperated look on her face. It doesn't hum like bees, Captain. That's the quantum resonance field. It means it's functioning properly. Elias raised an eyebrow. If properly functioning means it sounds like it's about to explode, I'm going to need a new definition. Thera sighed and walked over, snatching the screwdriver from his hand. Honestly, how did you make it through pilot school? By avoiding the mechanic's exam, Elias quipped. She crouched next to him, her deft hands moving over the stabilizer with practiced ease. The stabilizer is designed to sync with your ship's core matrix. Once I calibrate it, it'll regulate the power flow and prevent another meltdown. Unless, of course, you decide to push the engines past their limit again. Elias held up his hands defensively. Hey, the engines were fine until I got shot at by a rogue mining drone. Thera smirked. Sure they were, Captain. Sure they were. The next few hours passed in a blur of wires, circuits, and sarcastic banter. Elias couldn't help but notice how at ease Thera seemed as she worked, her focus unshakable, even when he accidentally dropped a wrench on her foot. You've done this before, he said, watching as she connected the stabilizer to the Wayfarer's power core. Thera didn't look up. You don't say. No, I mean, you're good at this. Like, really good. Better than most engineers I've met. Thera finally glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Let's just say I've had a lot of practice. Life on the edge of the galaxy doesn't leave much room for mistakes. Elias frowned but decided not to press the issue. Thera was like a puzzle, one he wasn't sure he wanted to solve just yet. By the time the stabilizer was fully installed, the twin suns were dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert. Elias stretched, wincing as his muscles protested. So, we're good to go? He asked, leaning against the hull of his ship. Thera wiped her hands on a rag and nodded. The stabilizer's in place, and the power systems are running smoother than they have in years. You're welcome. Elias grinned. I'd say thank you, but I'm pretty sure I already paid in bruised pride. Thera chuckled, tossing the rag aside. Don't spend it all in one place, Captain. Just as Elias was about to climb into the ship, a strange sound broke the quiet, a low, pulsating hum that seemed to vibrate through the air. He froze, his hand on the hatch. Please tell me that's not the ship, he said, glancing at Thera. Her expression had turned serious, her eyes scanning the horizon. It's not the ship. The hum grew louder, accompanied by a flicker of light in the distance. Elias squinted, trying to make out the source. What is that? Thera's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Trouble. The source of the disturbance revealed itself moments later, a massive, insect-like machine hovering just above the dunes. Its segmented body glowed faintly, and its legs ended in sharp metallic points that glinted menacingly in the fading light. Elias stared at it, his mouth dry. Is that a giant robot bug? Thera grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the ship. It's a tracker drone, and it's not here to make friends. Elias stumbled after her, his mind racing. Tracker drone? What's it tracking? Thera didn't answer until they were inside the ship, the hatch sealed behind them. Me, she said simply. Elias blinked. Wait, what? Thera was already at the controls, her hands moving over the console with practiced urgency. That drone is here because of me. Someone must have tipped them off that I'm on this planet. Elias sat heavily in the co-pilot seat, his earlier exhaustion replaced by a rising sense of panic. Okay, back up. Who's them? And why are they sending killer bug drones after you? Thera didn't look at him as she activated the ship's engines. It's a long story. Great, I love long stories, Elias said, gripping the armrests as the ship rumbled to life. Thera finally glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Let's just say I made some enemies in my line of work. Now hang on, this is going to get bumpy. The Wayfarer shot into the sky, its newly installed stabilizer humming smoothly despite the chaos outside. Elias watched the tracker drone through the viewport as it followed them, its movements unnervingly precise. Any chance we can outrun that thing? He asked, his voice tinged with hope. Thera shook her head. Not a chance. It's faster, smarter, and probably more stubborn than you. Elias frowned. Hey, I'm plenty stubborn. Thera smirked despite the tension. Noted. Now strap in. I'm going to try something. Elias barely had time to buckle his harness before Thera banked the ship sharply, sending it into a steep dive toward the desert below. The tracker drone followed, its glowing body a blur against the darkening sky. What are you doing? Elias shouted, clutching the console for support. Thera's grin was sharp and feral, leveling the playing field. The ship skimmed the surface of the dunes, its engines kicking up clouds of sand. Thera guided it with precision, weaving through rocky outcroppings and jagged cliffs. The tracker drone stayed on their tail, its metallic legs slicing through the air with unsettling speed. Elias watched as Thera brought the ship dangerously close to a narrow canyon. Tell me you know what you're doing. Of course I do, Thera said. Mostly. Mostly? Relax, Captain, trust me. Elias groaned. That's what you said last time, and now we're being chased by a giant bug. Thera laughed, the sound unexpectedly light. Fair point, but this time I've got a plan. The canyon walls closed in around them, the ship's thrusters echoing off the stone. Thera kept the ship steady, her focus unshakable. Almost there, she muttered. Almost where? Elias asked, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. Thera didn't answer. Instead, she pulled a lever, and the ship's rear thrusters flared with a sudden burst of energy. The tracker drone, caught off guard, hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Thera to bank hard and send the ship rocketing out of the canyon. The drone wasn't so lucky. Its momentum carried it into the canyon wall, where it exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Remind me to never question your plans again. Thera leaned back in her seat, a satisfied smile on her lips. You're learning, Captain. Slowly, but surely. Elias shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. This just keeps getting better and better. Thera's smile faltered slightly, her gaze distant. You have no idea. Elias stood in the cockpit of the Wayfarer, watching the canyon walls shrink behind them as the ship soared into the upper atmosphere. His hands were still trembling slightly from their near-death experience, but he was doing his best to play it cool. Well, that was fun, he said, leaning back against the console. What's next? Giant space squids? A black hole detour? Thera shot him a sidelong glance, her expression half amused and half annoyed. If you're done whining, I need to focus. Whining? Elias feigned offense. I'll have you know this is sophisticated sarcasm. It's how I cope with impending doom. Thera smirked but didn't respond, her attention fixed on the ship's navigation panel. Elias crossed his arms, watching her work. So, are you going to tell me who sent that oversized robo-roach after us? Or do I get to keep guessing? Thera hesitated, her fingers hovering over the controls. It's complicated. Complicated how? She sighed, leaning back in her seat. Let's just say I've crossed paths with some powerful people, and they don't take kindly to being outsmarted. Elias raised an eyebrow. Outsmarted, huh? What did you do? Hack their bank accounts? Steal a priceless artifact? Blow up a moon? Thera glanced at him, her lips twitching in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Not a moon, but you're not far off. Elias groaned, running a hand through his hair. Great, I'm partnered with a fugitive mastermind. This is exactly how I pictured my week going. And despite the tension, the hum of the stabilizer gave the Wayfarer's flight a sense of ease it hadn't had in years. The ship glided through the atmosphere, its systems purring like a contented cat. Elias couldn't help but admire Thera's handiwork, even as he tried to wrap his head around the growing mess he'd stumbled into. So, what's the plan? He asked, breaking the silence. Thera tapped a few buttons, bringing up a holographic star map. First, we put some distance between us and Vikor. Then we find a safe place to lay low while I figure out our next move. Elias frowned, studying the map. Define safe place. Because the last time I trusted you, I ended up in a death race with a killer drone. Thera rolled her eyes. Safe, as in somewhere they won't think to look for us, and somewhere we can refuel, resupply, and regroup. Sounds simple enough, Elias said, leaning closer to the map. Where are we headed? Thera hesitated before pointing to a small, unassuming star system on the edge of the map. Elias squinted at the name. The Orithis Cluster? Never heard of it. Exactly, Thera said. It's a forgotten corner of the galaxy. Barely any traffic, no major settlements, and plenty of places to hide. Elias leaned back, crossing his arms. You've got this all figured out, don't you? Thera's expression turned serious. Not all of it, but enough to keep us alive. For now. The journey to the Orithis Cluster took several hours, giving Elias plenty of time to stew in his own thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was in way over his head, and that Thera wasn't telling him everything. To pass the time, he wandered down to the cargo hold, where Thera was sorting through a collection of salvaged parts and supplies. What you doing? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. Inventory, she replied without looking up. Exciting stuff. Thera shot him a glare. It's necessary, unlike whatever you're doing right now. Elias grinned. I'm providing moral support. You're welcome. She shook her head, but there was a faint smile on her lips. After a while, Elias decided to try a different tactic. So, tell me about this Orithis cluster. What makes it so special? Thera paused, her hands stilling over a pile of parts. It's unique, a place where the usual rules don't apply. Cryptic, Elias said. I like it. Care to elaborate? She sighed, sitting back on her heels. The Orithis cluster is full of anomalies, strange energy fields, gravitational distortions, planets that don't follow standard orbital mechanics. It's like the galaxy's little pocket of chaos. Elias raised an eyebrow. Sounds charming. It's dangerous, Thera said, her tone serious. But it's also the perfect place to disappear, if you know how to navigate it. Elias frowned. And you do? Thera didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. I've been there before, a long time ago. Elias studied her, noting the faraway look in her eyes. Something tells me there's more to this story. Thera shook her head, standing up and brushing off her hands. Not now, Captain. Let's just focus on getting there in one piece. When they finally arrived in the Orithis cluster, Elias understood why Thera had called it chaotic. The space around them was a swirling maelstrom of light and shadow, with stars that flickered like fireflies and nebulae that seemed to shift and writhe. Okay, Elias said, gripping the controls tightly. This place is officially creepy. Thera smirked. Welcome to the cluster. Keep your wits about you, Captain. It has a way of playing tricks on people. Elias glanced at her. Great. Any other helpful tips? Or should I just embrace the existential dread? Stay calm, follow my lead, and don't touch anything that glows, Thera said, her tone half joking. Elias chuckled nervously. Good to know. Navigating the cluster was like trying to fly through a storm while blindfolded. The ship's sensors were useless, scrambled by the strange energy fields that permeated the area. But Thera seemed unfazed, guiding Elias with steady instructions as they weaved through the chaos. Left, 3 degrees, she said, her voice calm but firm. Elias adjusted the controls, his knuckles white. Are we there yet? Almost, Thera said. A few tense minutes later, they emerged from the chaos into a pocket of calm, a small, uncharted planet with a shimmering blue atmosphere. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Please tell me this is it. Thera nodded. This is it. Welcome to Arithis 7. For now, it's home. Elias stared at the planet below, a mixture of relief and apprehension washing over him. Let's hope it's friendlier than it looks. Thera's smile was faint, but genuine. Don't worry, Captain. I've got your back. Elias couldn't help but smile in return. Well, that makes one of us. The landing was smoother than Elias had expected, given the chaos they'd just flown through. The Wayfarer settled on Arithis 7's surface with a soft hiss, its stabilizer humming contentedly. The planet's surface was bathed in a bluish hue, the air thick with an eerie luminescence that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Elias stepped out of the ship, his boots crunching against what looked like sand, but shimmered like glass. He adjusted his jacket, squinting at the strange, undulating terrain. Well, this place is weird. Thera joined him, her gaze scanning the horizon. Weird is good. Weird means they won't follow us here. Elias glanced at her. You seem awfully confident about that. Do tracker drones have a thing against neon deserts? Thera smirked. No, but their handlers do. Arithis 7's energy fields scramble most tracking tech. It's why this place is off the charts, literally. Elias nodded slowly, kicking a small, glowing pebble with the toe of his boot. Handy. Also unsettling. I give it a 5 out of 10 for charm. Noted, Thera said dryly. Now, let's set up a perimeter and make sure we're actually alone. As they unpacked a few essentials from the ship, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that the planet was watching them. The shifting hues of the landscape seemed to pulse in rhythm with his movements, and the air carried a faint, melodic hum that made his skin crawl. You've been here before, right? He asked, trying to sound casual. Thera paused, a small, uncharacteristic hesitation in her movements. Once, a long time ago. Elias leaned against a crate, arms crossed. You keep saying that. Care to elaborate? Or is mysterious vagueness part of your charm? Thera shot him a look, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something Elias couldn't quite place. This planet has history. Let's leave it at that. History, Elias repeated, raising an eyebrow. That's specific. Thera didn't respond, instead focusing on adjusting a handheld scanner. The scanner beeped softly, and Thera frowned at the screen. Strange. The energy readings are stronger than I remember. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Elias asked. Thera tilted her head. Depends. Could just be natural fluctuations. Or what? She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Or something, or someone, might be amplifying them. Elias groaned, running a hand through his hair. Great. So much for lying low. Thera smiled faintly. Relax, Captain. We're not in immediate danger. That's comforting, Elias muttered, because immediate is the best kind of danger. As the suns dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the shimmering terrain, Thera led Elias to a small outcrop of crystalline rock that overlooked a shallow valley. "See that?" she said, pointing to a cluster of structures partially buried in the sand. Elias squinted. "Are those buildings?" "Ruins," Thera said. "This planet used to be home to a civilization. They disappeared centuries ago, but some of their tech still works." Elias glanced at her. "Let me guess. You're planning to borrow some of it?" Thera smirked. "Borrowing implies I'll return it." "Of course," Elias said, rolling his eyes. "And I suppose you have a plan to get down there without setting off any ancient alien alarms." Thera's smile widened. "Trust me," Elias groaned. Famous last words. The journey to the ruins was surprisingly uneventful, though Elias couldn't help but feel like the planet itself was holding its breath. The closer they got, the louder the faint hum in the air became, resonating in his chest like a low drum beat. "This place gives me the creeps," he said, stepping over a jagged piece of crystal. Thera glanced back at him, her expression calm. "Good. It means you're paying attention." Elias snorted. "Great. I'll add mild paranoia to my skill set." The ruins were more intact than Elias had expected. The buildings, if they could be called that, were made of a strange translucent material that seemed to glow faintly in the fading light. Symbols etched into the walls pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, as if they were alive. Elias ran a hand over one of the walls, shivering as a faint vibration tickled his palm. "This is weirdly beautiful." Thera nodded, her gaze distant. "It's ancient but advanced. The people who lived here were centuries ahead of most civilizations in the galaxy." "What happened to them?" Elias asked. Thera didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "No one knows for sure. Some say they ascended to a higher plane of existence. Others think they destroyed themselves." "Cheery," Elias said, dropping his hand. Thera smiled faintly. "It's a cautionary tale, Captain. Power without wisdom is a dangerous thing." As they explored the ruins, Thera's scanner beeped intermittently, leading them deeper into the maze of crystalline corridors. "Any idea what we're looking for?" Elias asked, his voice echoing slightly. Thera didn't look up from the scanner. "Something that can help us. A power source, a weapon, anything that'll give us an edge." Elias frowned. "An edge against who?" Thera stopped, turning to face him. "The people chasing me aren't going to stop, Captain. They'll keep coming until they get what they want." "And what do they want?" Elias asked, his voice quiet. Thera hesitated, her gaze dropping to the scanner. "Me." Before Elias could respond, the hum in the air grew louder, the symbols on the walls pulsing faster. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice rising. Thera's brow furrowed. "I'm not sure. The energy readings are spiking." Elias glanced around, his unease growing. "Please tell me we didn't just wake up an ancient alien defense system." Thera didn't answer, her attention focused on the scanner. "There's something ahead. A chamber." "Great," Elias muttered. "Let's walk straight into the creepy glowing chamber. What could possibly go wrong?" The chamber was breathtaking. Its walls were lined with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, atop which rested a small glowing orb. Elias stared at it, his mouth dry. "That's not ominous at all." Thera approached the pedestal cautiously, her movements deliberate. "This might be what we need." "Might?" Elias said, staying near the doorway. "I'd prefer a bit more certainty before you start poking ancient artifacts." Thera glanced back at him, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Where's your sense of adventure, Captain?" "Buried under my sense of self-preservation," Elias shot back. Thera chuckled, turning her attention back to the orb. "Relax. I've got this." Elias groaned, watching as she reached out and gently lifted the orb from its pedestal. The room seemed to hold its breath, the hum in the air fading to an almost imperceptible whisper. "See?" Thera said, holding up the orb. "No alarms, no traps, just a—" A deep, resonant chime echoed through the chamber, cutting her off. Elias groaned. "You just had to say it." The chime reverberated through the chamber, low and steady, like the tolling of a distant bell. The walls shimmered, their carvings rearranging themselves into new patterns. Elias felt a deep unease settle over him, a sensation that was only partially eased by his now typical instinct to crack a joke. "Well," he said, taking a step back toward the door. "At least it's not a giant boulder rolling after us. That's something, right?" Thera didn't respond. She was staring at the glowing orb in her hands, her expression unreadable. "Thera?" Elias prompted, his voice a touch higher than he'd intended. "This is the part where you say, 'Don't worry, I've got everything under control,' and I pretend to believe you." Thera finally looked up, her eyes glinting with determination. "This isn't a weapon." "Fantastic," Elias said, throwing his hands in the air. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Maybe we can trade it for a really nice sandwich." Thera ignored him, turning toward the pedestal. "It's a key." Elias blinked. "A key? To what? Please don't say it's the ultimate knowledge of the universe, because I am not emotionally prepared for that level of responsibility." Thera's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "Not quite, but it's something just as valuable. Freedom." Before Elias could press her for details, the carvings on the walls began to glow brighter, the patterns converging into a single, intricate symbol. The hum in the air intensified, a deep resonance that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. "Okay," Elias said, edging toward the exit. "I'm officially voting for Runaway as our next move." Thera stood her ground, clutching the orb tightly. "It's activating." "Activating what?" Elias demanded. "And why does it sound like it's building up to a dramatic finale?" As if on cue, the chamber was bathed in a burst of light. Elias threw up his arms to shield his eyes, his pulse racing. When the light faded, he lowered his arms cautiously. The orb in Thera's hands was now glowing steadily, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed in rhythm with the carvings on the walls. Thera exhaled slowly, a look of relief washing over her face. "It worked." "What worked?" Elias asked, his voice tinged with exasperation. "Please, for the love of all things logical, explain what is happening." Thera turned to him, her expression softening. "This key isn't just a relic. It's a way to reset the energy fields of Orithus 7 and to neutralize the tracking technology that's been hunting us." Elias stared at her, his mind racing. "You're saying this thing can wipe the galaxy's GPS?" "Essentially," Thera said. "It'll give us the chance to disappear. For good." The return to the Wayfarer was uneventful, though the hum of the energy fields seemed to follow them like an invisible companion. Back on the ship, Thera set the orb into the navigation console, its glow spreading through the system like veins of liquid light. Elias watched, his arms crossed, as the ship's systems lit up one by one. "You really think this will work?" Thera glanced at him, her gaze steady. "It has to." "Comforting," Elias muttered. The ship shuddered slightly as the orb interfaced with its systems, and the hum of the stabilizer took on a deeper, more resonant tone. Thera's hands flew over the controls, her movements precise and efficient. "Once the reset is complete, the tracking signals will dissipate. We'll be free to go wherever we want, without looking over our shoulders." Elias leaned against the console, watching her. "And where do you want to go?" Thera paused, her fingers hovering over the controls. For a moment, her mask of confidence slipped, revealing a flicker of vulnerability. "I don't know," she admitted. Elias smiled faintly. "That's a first." Thera gave him a wry look. "Don't get used to it." The reset process took hours, during which time Elias and Thera found themselves in the rare position of having nothing urgent to do. Elias took the opportunity to rummage through the ship's storage compartments, eventually emerging with a slightly dented can of something that might have been coffee. "Care for a cup of mystery brew?" he asked, holding it up. Thera raised an eyebrow. "Is that even safe to drink?" "Probably not," Elias admitted, "but it's either this or the questionable protein bars you've been hoarding." Thera rolled her eyes but accepted the cup he handed her. As they sat in the dim light of the cockpit, sipping the dubious beverage, Elias broke the silence. "So, what happens after this? You just vanish into the void?" Thera looked at him, her gaze searching. "What about you? What happens to the Wayfarer and your endless quest for spare parts?" Elias chuckled. "I'll probably find another backwater planet to crash on. It's kind of my thing." Thera smiled, the expression tinged with something softer. "You could come with me." Elias blinked, caught off guard. "Seriously?" She nodded, her expression earnest. "You've proven yourself to be surprisingly capable, and I could use a pilot who knows how to improvise." Elias grinned. "Is that your way of saying you like my reckless charm?" Thera rolled her eyes. "Don't push it." When the reset was finally complete, the hum of the stabilizer faded into a calm, steady rhythm. The ship's systems glowed with a soft, golden light, and the air felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Thera leaned back in her seat, exhaling deeply. "It's done." Elias studied her, noting the way her shoulders relaxed for the first time since they'd met. "So, that's it? No more killer drones, no more shady bounty hunters?" Thera nodded. "For now, at least." Elias smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression. "I'll take it." As the Wayfarer lifted off from Arithis 7, the glowing planet shrinking behind them, Elias couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. He'd started this journey as a down-on-his-luck pilot with a broken ship and no direction. Now he had a working ship, a mysterious new partner, and a whole galaxy of possibilities ahead of him. He glanced at Thera, who was adjusting the navigation controls with her usual focus. "So, where to next?" Thera looked at him, a small smile playing at her lips. "Anywhere but here, Captain." Elias grinned, settling into his seat. "I like the sound of that." With a final, reassuring hum, the Wayfarer leapt into hyperspace, leaving the chaos of the past behind and racing toward an uncertain but promising future.